There is a moment that looks small from the outside, but repeats through entire lives. Something begins. A new direction, a new habit, a new project, a new way of speaking, moving, trying, showing up. At first, there is energy, not perfect confidence, not total certainty, but enough movement for something to start. And then, almost immediately, something else appears. Interruption. Not always dramatic, not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like hesitation, sometimes like overcorrection, sometimes like sudden doubt, sometimes like the need to step back and think again. But the function is the same. Momentum is broken. You stop yourself just as things begin. This pattern is difficult to recognize because from the inside, it rarely feels like self-interruption. It feels reasonable. You tell yourself, I need to slow down. I need to be sure. I need to rethink this. I moved too quickly. I should wait a little longer. All of this sounds intelligent, measured, careful, responsible. But very often, the interruption is not about wisdom. It is about exposure. Beginning something changes the emotional structure of experience. Before the beginning, everything is still imagined. You can plan, refine, adjust, prepare. Nothing has been tested yet. Nothing has entered consequence. But the moment something begins, imagination becomes reality. Now the process is moving. Now uncertainty becomes active. Now feedback can arrive. Something can fail. Something can change. Something can reveal you more clearly than intention ever did. This is why beginnings carry a very specific kind of pressure. Not the pressure of the whole path. The pressure of no longer being hidden inside possibility. At the beginning, you are visible. Visible to yourself. Visible to consequence. Visible to what actually happens when thought becomes action. And that visibility is often what the system cannot tolerate for very long. So interruption appears. Not because the beginning was wrong, but because the beginning made something real. The mind can tolerate desire more easily than process. It can tolerate planning more easily than exposure. It can tolerate wanting more easily than momentum, because momentum creates contact, and contact removes distance. Once you are in motion, you can no longer protect yourself through preparation alone. Now there is evidence. Now there is response. Now there is the possibility that the reality of the thing will not match the image you had of it. This is where many people stop themselves. Not at the point of failure. At the point where failure becomes possible. Not at the point of rejection. At the point where rejection can no longer be avoided through delay. Not at the point of difficulty. At the point where difficulty becomes actual instead of imagined. This is why the pattern often appears right after momentum. A burst of clarity, a burst of movement, a burst of intention, then interruption. The system lets you begin, but not continue. Because beginning creates hope, but continuing creates exposure. And exposure destabilizes the carefully maintained image of control. You can still believe in yourself before the process unfolds. You can still believe the project will work, the habit will stick, the new direction will hold. But once the beginning is real, belief is no longer enough. Now the process will show what is actually supported and what is not. And that is where interruption becomes attractive. It gives you a way to stop the process before reality becomes too informative. You can call it caution. You can call it timing. You can call it needing space. But underneath all of that, something more specific is happening. The system is trying to prevent the beginning from becoming revelation. Because if it continues, something will be learned. Something about your capacity, something about your patterns, something about your actual level of trust, tolerance, discipline, or fragility. And that learning may not match the version of yourself you were still able to imagine before things began. This is why self-interruption often happens at the threshold between desire and evidence. As long as something is only desired, it remains open. Once it begins, it starts becoming real. And reality has more authority than self-concept. The beginning threatens that balance. So the pattern intervenes, not to destroy the movement, to contain it, to slow it down before it changes too much, to stop it before it reveals too much. And because this happens through thoughts that sound careful and intelligent, the interruption is often obeyed without question. That is what gives the pattern so much power. It does not attack the beginning. It persuades it to stop. Once this is seen, the pattern becomes easier to recognize. Not easier to stop immediately, but easier to see while it is happening. You begin to notice that the interruption does not come from nowhere. It has a texture, a tightening, a cooling of momentum, a sudden return to caution, a thought that sounds responsible, but carries the function of retreat. The movement had life. Then something in you decided that life was becoming too exposed. This is the important shift. You stop treating interruption as wisdom by default. You begin to ask, what exactly is being protected here? Not the project, not the path, not the decision itself. Usually, an image of competence, an image of safety, an image of who you still hope to be before reality gives its response. This is why interruption can feel so necessary. It is not only stopping an action, it is preserving a self-concept. If the process continues, something real will be tested. If something real is tested, something real will be revealed. And revelation is what the pattern resists. So the interruption creates distance. Distance from consequence. Distance from feedback. Distance from the version of yourself that only reality can expose. But once that is seen, something begins to loosen. The interruption is no longer only a thought. It is a movement of self-protection. And self-protection can be felt more precisely than the reasons it gives. This does not mean you force yourself forward. It means you stop confusing retreat with clarity. You let the beginning remain open for one moment longer, long enough to feel the pressure without immediately obeying it. That is where continuation begins, not through confidence, through contact, through allowing the movement to continue even while part of you still wants to shut it down. That is the real threshold, not the beginning itself. The moment after the beginning, when you decide whether reality will be allowed to keep unfolding. This is inner cognition.